Welcome to the Middle Cross Moments podcast, presented by the Middle Cross Mission. I am your host, Tyler Hoffland. Today, we embark on a journey of transformation and hope. Our guest, Adam Martin, exemplifies the power of resilience and the impact of second chances. From overcoming personal struggles to founding the F5 project, Adam's story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Join us as we explore how moments of clarity and determination can lead to profound change. Let's dive into this inspiring conversation and discover the light that guides us through life's challenges. Adam, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Adam, before we get into what F5 is and the work that it's doing, can you lead me through some of the moments earlier that kind of got you started and led to the creation of F5?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, there was no real intention of starting F5. It was more of a thing. It was like a happenstance, God coincidence thing that just kind of, I always had a flicker in my heart that I wanted to do something for the people, right? Especially people who were like me. Um, but I was pretty comfortable, working at a tech firm that I was working at. I was doing business development, sales and marketing, and had no real intentions. And then I got asked to go speak at an event, a local event, for a nonprofit, um, to help raise some money for their goals or whatever for that year. They had heard me tell my story, like a clipping of my story at like a Rotary event or something. Um, and they asked me if I'd be willing to come and tell my story at their event. And, I was a little reluctant because I hadn't been very public about, my history or, my past or behaviors or addiction or that I was homeless or anything like that. Except for small settings in the community. And they were planning on having like 900 professionals from all over Fargo at this event. And, I went to my boss, I told him about it, and I told him that I was a little, fearful of doing it because I didn't know how people were going to respond. And just letting my dog out. um, and he said, I was fearful that we lose some clients or whatever because I'm about to tell everybody that I'm a felon and, I had struggled with drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. And he basically said, if we lose clients because you're being helpful and honest and transparent, then, you know, do we really want them as clients? And so he was uh, a godly man. He went to church all the time. He talked about Jesus at work and stuff. And he liked the idea of me doing it. I think going back, I don't think either one of us realized how much momentum off that one talk that it was going to be because I gave that talk and then the next thing I know I'm on the front page of the local newspaper and second chance pays off is kind of the title and and I knew at that moment I wanted to do something. Like I just didn't know what it was. And I reached out to the court and asked them if they knew anybody at the jail, if they could do an introduction to see if I could do jail meetings and that's where it took off. Was I was just going to go into the jail and start telling my story. And then, the original name badge that I had says, volunteer Adam Martin job skills. So, and now all the people who go into the jail with me from work, it all says F5 project. Mine's the only one that says job skills because there wasn't even an idea or a business or anything when I started. I was just trying to be helpful. So that's kind of how it came to be. I lasted at my job for maybe another 4 months after that initial talk and left then and started F5.
So take me back a little further. So you spent time incarcerated as well. You just mentioned you were homeless. The name F5, I believe, is invoked from your personal of having five felony convictions, right? And kind of the F5 reset key. Uh, were was What was that moment of your life like where things were spiraling out of control, and and you realized you're going to be incarcerated, you are incarcerated. Did you find the um like the grace within you while you were incarcerated, or did you have a moment of homelessness? Was that before or after?
I think there was brief periods. I mean, that's what's wild about addiction, man, is that um I always wanted to do something, and it wasn't necessarily because I thought I was capable. It was because I just did so badly didn't want to live that life anymore. And I felt like if I started helping people, it, that it was somehow God was going to take care of me. Right. And so I think every addict and alcoholic I've ever met, know, like ones that go to treatment or ones that go to prison or whatever, eventually want to be an LAC, or they want to start a nonprofit, or they want to get into some kind of service orientated, job and do it full time. I don't think I ever like necessarily wanted to do something big like that. I just wanted to stay sober. And I thought, I mean, not only did I thought, it was proven true that the more that I helped people get sober, get clean, the easier it was going to be for me to do that.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was like, it's, not that I believe in any kind of prosperity gospel or anything like that. Like or, like the more people you help, the better person you're going to be, or, anything like that.
Hmm.
I just didn't want to die drunk. And, and I felt like um, the more you struggled with with addiction or alcoholism, the more you needed to do to stay sober. It was more of a mental health thing than it was necessarily a spiritual thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would say when I was trying to be sober, there was brief periods that I wanted to do something like I am today, and like I would fantasize about, giving talks and sitting at coffee and talking to people about recovery, and you know what I mean? But nothing like I'm doing today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why? So let's, from an addiction standpoint, never having been addicted myself, and I think a lot of people that look at that, folks that are struggling with addiction, um, why is it so hard to walk away from that for addicts?
For me, it was a relief valve when I was living in that life or whatever. I was just constantly under stress, um, anxiety, depression, despair. Like it was just constant negative feelings all the time. Uh, and when it was either like feel like that all the time or at least numb it out all the
Sure.
time. And even when I did have brief periods of recovery where things were getting better, I think a lot of times it's really hard for people who've never really had to deal with emotions, um, to finally deal with them. And it gets hard, man. Like when I get excited, I think about suicide. When I get depressed, I think about it. Right?
Hmm.
Like I just become obsessed with the idea of like what my life would be like if I didn't exist. And and when I would use, I wouldn't think about those things.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so I think it's the body and the mentals like go to is relief, and alcohol and drugs always gave me that. It was like many times it was like I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to get high, you know? And so, I mean, uh, i- if there was any other reason, we would have figured it out by now, right? Like there's so many different reasons. For some, they can't handle life. For some, they're bored. For some, like it's mental health. Like it's different for everybody. I mean, rich, poor, CEO, people living on the streets, it may all be relative to whatever environment they're in, but at the end of the day is that people don't want to feel the way that they're feeling.
Sure. Hey, quick shout out to one of our sponsors. If you're thinking about buying a home, refinancing, or just want to understand your options, reach out to Dylan Newberger with Loan Depot, located in Minot, North Dakota. Dylan makes the process simple, clear, and built around you. No pressure, just real answers. Call or text him directly, and I'll drop his info in the show notes. Take that first step and see what's possible today. Hey, quick word from one of our sponsors. If your business needs custom metal fabrication done right, check out Metal Masters of Wisconsin. Specializing in stainless steel and also experts with carbon steel and aluminum. They handle small to large projects from prototype to production. They take pride in doing a good job with integrity, craftsmanship, and a commitment to something bigger than just the bottom line. If you need precision you can trust, connect with Metal Masters of Wisconsin. I'll drop their info in the show notes. Because do you guys find a common way that helps people most of the time? Or is it constantly a catch, this person and we're going to do that way with them? Is it ever a common way that helps?
If you would have asked me 10 plus years ago, because I started going to recovery meetings back in 2001. I didn't get sober till 2013. So if you would have asked me prior to 2013, maybe a little later after that, I would have told you there's only one real way, and it would have been 12-step programs. Um, and I think for the people who really put in the work with 12-step programs, it has its benefits. But there's so many different pathways today compared to the even 10 years ago, or let alone back in the 60s or the 40s, that I think there's multiple pathways to recovery. Because when there's not multiple pathways, it's usually because of judgment, right? Tribalism, you know, or maybe a guy did it one way and it didn't work for him, and then he tried another way and it worked for him, so then he's an evangelist for making sure people don't do it that way, you know what
Sure.
I mean? And I've been that guy before. I've been that way with that AA or NA, or um is the only way or whatever. And then a period I went through where it was like, you have to go to treatment if you want to be sober. And then I went through a period where I was like, what the point is treatment? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then now you got medicated assisted treatment, and you got, social detoxes and medical detoxes. And then treatment centers that are doing body brokering, and, like it's just, and peer supports and recovery coaches. And at the end of the day, dude, the one thing that all of them have in common with success is that the person who's going through whatever program it is putting in the effort. Hey, is putting in the effort to whatever the program is. And
Sure.
so as long as they're putting in effort, I don't get in the way of any effort if they're practicing a program, because the best teacher um is experience.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah,
Ugh.
absolutely. So did you find when you came out from incarceration, and you had to so you got a job with the telecommunications company, right? Um, did you find that difficult to get that job? And then also from an identity standpoint, did you feel like you were, not that, like you didn't matter in some ways, or did you struggle with some of that identity?
I struggled before the event,
Okay.
right? So like I would get in my head about, yeah, I guess my identity, my past and stuff that people weren't going to understand, mainly because I had heard horror stories of other people, right? Where they're like, post on their Facebook, they're like, I've applied at all these places and I can't even get an interview. So really it was my acquaintance type community of people who were in similar circumstances that actually ruined it for me, right?
Okay.
And so, it's just the same thing as like the news. It's why the news really focuses on negativity rather than they do positive. And so I would get to the point like I would hear all these negative stories about employers or, success or, whatever. And then anytime I did hear a positive story, it was like, well, we're different. You know what I
Sure.
mean? And so it was actually the community that was very negative on it where, you hear people trying to pass, legislation that they can't do background checks and, all this stuff. And I'm just like, man, I'm screwed. I got 5 felonies. I've been locked up half my life on and off, been to detox, homeless shelters. I got huge time gaps between my employment. I don't even have enough. I don't even have a driver's license. I like, and I think so leading up to whatever event, whether it was an interview or whatever, my head would get the best of me, yeah. But it was never, I had a person in my life where it was like, look at the facts, like have those things happen to you. Right? And, um, and so I put forth the effort just like I do with my recovery, just like I do with being a dad. All of it takes effort and whatever you're focused on, that's what you're gonna become, right?
Yeah.
And so if I'm focused on the negativity, I'm focused on being a felon and focus on that, I'm gonna be those things. But if I focus on putting in the effort of getting a job or starting a business or being a better dad or being a church member, I'll become those things. They just won't happen overnight, right?
Yeah.
And so when I showed up to that interview at the tech firm, I was really nervous, man, because I walked there, like, and everybody there had driver's licenses and vehicles and stuff, and so I definitely felt different. And I wore a suit that I got at a thrift shop. I shined my shoes in the gas station with a banana peel um because it was like the last thing before I walked into that interview is they were going to see how scuffed up my shoes were and they were not going to extend me a job. And I don't know why that got in my head, but it did. And I just got really nervous. And so I bought a banana, ate the banana, and then it just popped in my head that it was like wet on the inside
Yeah.
of the banana peel. Shined them. It worked great for probably, I don't know, it dried pretty quick or whatever. Because by the time I walked out of that interview, they looked the same, you
Sure.
know. But did the interview, and even in the interview, I was just like, man, this is way easier than I thought it was going to be. Um, because I've been in jury trials, I've had judges, I've had, you know, prosecutors, like shame me in front of a judge. And like, man, out here, like it's way easier to do those things that seem similar to the things that I had been through. So a lot of the skill sets and experiences that I had gained over the years in the negative sense had actually contributed to a skill set and transferable skills into the life that I was going to live.
Yeah.
Right. And when I
Yeah.
when I identified that, CEOs weren't a problem anymore, chief financial officers, businesses, knocking on doors, making cold calls. Like I was like, man, I've done all this stuff when I was begging and stealing and lying or
Mhm.
whatever. Now I'm doing it like for legit, and it's way easier because people are willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee, and I don't have to sit there and manipulate them.
Yeah. No, and I think that's one of the things at our mission too that we're trying to hit with from a leadership standpoint is you can be what you want to be. If you want to be a good dad or a good mom, be one. That it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes intentional time and practice. If you want to be a good Christian, be
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
And if you want to be the CEO of something, you go be it. And whereas I think a lot of times society will tell you you can't do. You grow up wanting to be a professional athlete, but you're told you can't do that because only certain people get to do it. It's like, well, if you have a dream, go do it. It's
yeah. Do
it's
it
it
anyways, even if you
yeah,
don't have the the talent, right? I mean, because a lot
Right.
of people who are professional athletes at least have some level of talent.
Right.
It still takes a lot of hard work, and I would rather if I really want I don't wanna be an athlete, but, like, if I wanted to, at least try, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of it, you're gonna be healthier anyways, you know what I
Right.
mean? And it's
And
fun,
yeah, and
so
it's positive energy that you're putting out into the world as a result of just trying to do good for it. And I think with your story, what's really admirable about it is you have taken now F5 that was, something that just was born out of, a talk, and now you're spread all over North Dakota. And even I think in Minnesota a little bit as well. The program that you guys are using in North Dakota is one of the group, probably the bleeding edge of second chance programs in the US. And it was all because you had a vision, you and others had a vision, and you made it happen. So what does the F5 program look like? If I am incarcerated and I'm coming out into the world, what do you do for me?
yeah, you know, uh, most people that come to us, I mean, we have probably over 600 monthly participants that we're just, we're helping find jobs, find housing, secure housing, get into recovery, a ton of peer support. So people, on my team that are helping guys get to their probation meetings to help them get their IDs, the way I try to explain it is like, when a parent is getting their kid ready for college, right? There's a lot that goes into it, like apartment furnishings, making sure they have all the right credentials, they're in the right classes, they applications. It's very similar with, somebody coming out of prison, making sure that they have all those things too, right? Um, and why do we do it? Because it's just, you know, most of the people that work at F5 were in those shoes at one time. That's the differentiator between us and most organizations, probably nationally, that do what we do, is that you really had to have like done some crazy shit to not be able to work at F5, right? And it's not even probably what you did, it's probably that you're still doing it. You know what I mean? Like like if like we it's pretty rare that I mean, we'll do it, but we rarely hire people that are still currently on probation, right? Like in most people had to have been sober for a while. They had to have been detached from being on paper for a while. But every once in a while, we'll come across someone, right, that's like putting in a ton of effort and had some pretty good success, and we put them on the team. But outside of that, like, you know, have you been sober and active in your recovery? Did you successfully complete probation? Because we want to take people who have successfully re-entered society and then have them come back and help the people that are coming behind
Yeah.
them, because it's a different conversation, me telling you how I live my life and how I change my life rather than sitting in a room building some goals and me telling you what goals you should have because you know what I mean? And then, you know, being that case manager that like tells you how to live your life and then you see him on Facebook, drinking and hanging out with the other case managers at the bar or whatever and you're just like you
Yeah,
just
it's
kind
not
of
gonna work, right?
no. I mean, it might work or whatever. There's some
Yeah.
good-hearted case managers out there, but it just hits differently when it comes from someone is doing the same thing that you're
Yeah.
about to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think have you noticed for you personally, just stepping into that kind of a leadership role, um, have you noticed any other types of individuals that has it been pretty easy for you from a leadership perspective, or have you had any leadership type challenges, I would say?
I think in the peer support world, most people that are peer supports have never really worked in a corporate environment. They've never really had to have a lot of policies per se. before I got into working at the tech firm, I most of the job was like car washes and serve tables and stuff. And there's just like you just go in, do a job, and leave. There's not really big, it's not like working at like a large corporation where there's like little micro communities that are building there, you know what I mean? And they have
Yeah,
a ton of policies and 401ks and all that stuff. So it's interesting trying to herd a group of peer supports that have never really probably worked well with other, you know what I
sure.
mean?
Yeah.
And so I know that this is why a lot of treatment centers and other organizations have never really built out peer support models. Is it's a really hard thing to professionalize when
Mhm.
most of the clientele is probably going to be your friends. You know what I mean? So that's a really interesting kind of organizational conflict of interest, trying to professionalize that and, because it's like, a guy relapses while he's on our caseload or whatever. And, our team is like, I don't want to tell anyone,
Mhm.
like he just needs to go to meetings or he needs to go back to treatment or whatever. And we still have a justice system that's still pretty punitive about relapse. And so we've had to like kind of navigate through those things where it's like we finally came to a conclusion that if any of our peers relapse while they're on our caseload, we give them, because we're on a contract with the states, right? We had to figure out how we're going to convey that information to probation officers. And so we met with probation and we're just like, listen, it puts us in a weird spot. Like we're all about recovery, and in our opinion, relapse can be like it's not
Sure.
necessarily a part of recovery, but it can be, right? We
Mhm.
can use it as a learning opportunity. And if they feel like we're just a bunch of snitches, they're not going to tell us,
Yeah,
right? And so, but then at the same time, the state's like, you have to tell us. So we have to find that happy medium. And they gave us the opportunity to, if they tell us, we have 24 hours before we have to say something to the probation officer. So it gives us time to work with that individual for them to do that themselves.
sure.
You know what
Okay.
I mean?
Yeah.
And it puts a little accountability on them, some grace on them, and then for them to do the right thing rather than us be put in a position where we have to do it.
Yeah. 'Cause I would imagine if if I am, that peer in that situation, I'm more apt to relapse if I know no one's going to find out. So if you guys can keep it quiet, then no harm, no foul. It's probably more likely to happen. But also, given you the time, that now gives you guys an opportunity to help coach them through, the appropriate steps forward to minimize the damage, probably for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, because it's part of their probation that they don't use or drink or whatever. So it's
sure.
technically a violation.
Hmm.
And so because of our relationship with the Department of Corrections and stuff, we've seen early on where a lot of people were getting locked up for relapse, we're seeing that a lot of that's changing and they're giving people multiple opportunities through relapse to try and better their lives and pivot and do the right thing. And we're seeing a lot of good success because of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to call them graduates, but I don't know what you call them, but are you finding success in the employment world, and as they kind of move on from F5 and that type of thing, are they finding success through the program?
I think that North Dakota is kind of like a little incubator, compared to the rest of the nation. Maybe South Dakota is similar, Wyoming, some of these states with a smaller populace, there's a really big struggle in our economy in these smaller, I guess we could call it rural America,
Mhm.
where we have tons of job openings and not enough people to fill those roles.
Sure.
And so we've been lucky enough to where guys in our houses or on our caseloads, it's not very difficult for them to find a job. Um, and and so that's never really been an issue from the start. right? Like people there, if guys don't have jobs within a couple weeks or whatever, there's something else at play. You
Sure.
know, maybe it's a really severe felony they have on their record. You know, maybe it's, their personality, they don't interview well, right? You know, I think the one privilege that I had when I was looking for work is that it's really easy for me to talk. I can come up with things on the fly. You know, I can work hard, right? And you can kind of see that in my interview style. So, I mean, every once in a while, we'll have to do some mock interviews with guys in the houses just to show them how to do that better. But for the most part, addicts and alcoholics are kind of a different breed where they have had to learn how to develop personalities throughout their life, right? And have a skill set that is, you know, it's not that they can't get the job. A lot of times the problem is them keeping the job.
Yeah.
Right? Accountability and being stable and making good de like, if I had to choose between guys that are coming out of college and guys that are coming out of prison to fulfill a job that I had 9 out of 10 times, I'll choose a guy coming out of prison because he's lived life, right? And he's had to, live on the streets, he's built up experience, he's probably had a few different jobs, he's developed a good personality. The soft skills with guys coming out of prison are very high, right?
Mhm.
Where most people coming out of college have never really had to live life, outside of being in little incubators,
Yeah.
school, college, frat house, whatever. Um, but their like hard skills, right? Like the things they learned in school and stuff, like they know that like the back of their hand, right? But I'm not really hiring for someone who has a degree, right? I'm hiring someone who's going to put in the work and know how to do it without having to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and I think, I would imagine that, society as a whole probably looks at that, backwards, right? They're taking the college graduate, um, because, that person coming out of prison is probably jaded in a lot of ways in the views of society. So, I think that's a really important perspective to get out to people.
Yeah. That's also why I'm a really big advocate for doing schooling in prison because if, you know, I had a professor tell me one time when I was like having dinner with her and her husband and her son or whatever, she was like, Have you ever been to college?" And I'm like, "No." And she's like, "Man, with your personality and your charisma and if you had a degree, you would be unstoppable."
Yeah,
Whatever. And I was like, I kind of took it as a compliment that I didn't, I
absolutely.
mean, have a degree, but it made sense that people with social skills and people with degrees usually will get a lot farther ahead than one with just one or the other.
Yeah. Well,
So
absolutely. I think in the hiring world, if you can present the piece of paper, you've now, qualified for a lot more things than if you don't have it, even if you don't have the greatest soft skills
yeah,
uh, around. So, and you are, Adam. I saw a social media post. You are also a speaker, right? You are going, doing some keynote speaking and that kind of thing. Did that morph out of, the first talk you gave? Have you kind of just been like a freight train ever since then in the world of keynote speaking, or how'd you get
yeah,
yourself going there?
I've gotten quite a few. I think most of them probably came because of how much the media pays attention to F5 and what we're doing and
Sure.
new offices and, stuff like that. Maybe some from the podcast that we used to do or whatever. Yeah, I never know. I just randomly get them every once in a while. I've spoke at human services conferences, technology conferences, corporate events, children conferences. Like it's kind of been all over the map. I think but that's kind of testament to, you know, um, it's my opinion, but I believe that the justice impacted individual is the one center point of every industry. So it's, because they usually have a probation officer, they're seeking counselors, they have, family that might be a part of CPS, employers are hiring them. It's like the one, center point of interest of every that it affects every industry and every, program and every agency in some way or another. So it makes sense that someone who's justice impacted, who's built out a company and built out a community would find themselves being asked to speak at multi-industry events.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so as we begin to close, I want to chat with you a little bit about, so this is the Middle Cross Moments podcast. We are very into our faith here and all those kinds of things you've invoked, and we're talking about God earlier. And I would just in me listening to you, I would call your middle cross. So the moment, what we're saying is that's kind of the turning point. That's when things went from bad to starting to be good. Where would you place that for you?
Well, I think I'm of the educational variety when it comes to spiritual experience,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that I don't necessarily think there was like a moment of time that a pivot or a crossroad necessarily happened. I think that God has been with me since the start. And there's been moments of clarity that have happened repetitively over time to when the day came that I finally stayed sober, or it was seeds planted all along the way, um, that finally took root, right? Um, and that day came. If you were to ask me, it was the day that it's cats, man. Um, it was the day that the last drink happened when I had a gun pulled on me, and it was like my last friend, um, that did it. So
Mm-hmm.
from an overall standpoint, that's the moment that it happened. But I think all the moments that it's kind of like the choose your own adventure book. You know what I mean? Where it's just like you don't really know what's going to happen next. So like when that day happened, I didn't really think I was going to stay sober.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Stop, please. Uh, I didn't really think it was going to happen because I had tried getting sober 1,000 times before and it never worked.
Sure.
But now looking back at it, they did because they all led to the moment that it eventually happened. You know what I mean? And so, like, all my successes, all my failures, all my bad decisions, all my good decisions, all led to the moment that I'm on this podcast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
And so if I'm
phenomenal.
gonna take credit for all my successes, I
Absolutely.
I better take credit for the failures too, because they got me here just as
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. And what would you say if there's someone out there listening that is struggling with addiction right now? What what on earth would you tell them?
There's a difference between a failure and a quitter. A failure is a one person who quits, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um I know that sounds weird when I say there's a difference between the 2, um, but I think a lot of people feel like failures when they're trying, and then there's people who just quit, and in my brain, I think we have those definitions in reverse. I think that you failed if you quit. I think that as long as you're trying, as long as you're struggling, as long as you continue to be kind and you continue to try and be honest, like, and you continue no matter what happens, the relapse, the obsessive thinking, the whatever, you find out your wife cheated on you and then you couldn't handle it and you went out and relapse and then you show up the next day and go to a meeting. You know what I mean? Like as long as you're trying, you're not a failure.
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
quit, you are.
right. Yeah, that's powerful stuff. And quitting in this context is end of life or just falling into homelessness or, doing those
Yeah.
kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, really, at the same thing, if it is an end of life, you know, the end of life is the same thing as you're looking for relief. You know what I mean? Like, I've never judged anyone for taking their life. I get it. I mean, even sober, I've thought about it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so I'll never judge anyone who has ever taken their life because to me, it's the same thing as relapsing. Like the only reason that I didn't do it is because I still had hope in drugs and alcohol was going to be able to do what it needed to do to prevent me from committing suicide.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's when the drugs and the alcohol stop working is when you need to worry
Sure.
if you don't
Yeah.
have a solution.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrap your mind around that concept.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being very honest about that because that's interesting and very deep thought provoking thing you said. So cool. Well, Adam, this has been a great experience for me. For everyone who's listening, follow Adam on LinkedIn, follow Adam wherever else you are. Are you on X or
Yeah.
Facebook and
All of
wherever
them.
else? Follow him. He puts out a lot of great stuff. The F5 project is doing all kinds of great work in the state of North Dakota, starting in the state of Minnesota. Adam is speaking around the country. I saw he's going to be in New York soon speaking. So follow him there. This is someone who has experienced a very difficult portion of his life, addiction, things like that, and has found himself on the backside of that, and is doing phenomenal work for others that are in that kind of moment of despair. So we appreciate him here at the Middle Cross Mission, and appreciate you for joining our podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, man. Anytime.